All right, so we're going to do an install video on our second gen control arms. Our control arms utilize a rebuildable flex joint. They are a lot more firm than your factory bushings. Takes some of that extra slop out of the front end and just keeps everything in place a lot better. They are a spanner nut design, so they can be tightened up, and the bushings can also be replaced. It's a fully serviceable joint if you have wear down the road. We're going to be installing these one at a time. Before you get started, you do want to make sure that you have new hardware. One of the things that you most likely will run into is seized hardware. These things like to get rusted in. There's oftentimes sawzalls, air chisels, and all kinds of crazy stuff involved in getting these out on these older trucks. So just make sure you have hardware available to replace those if you need to before you get started, so that you don't get yourself into a pickle. All right, some things to pay attention to while you're doing this. First of all, doing these one by one, you just want to set them the same length as your factory bar. So just simply take a measurement from center of hole to center of hole on your factory ones, and then make sure that your joints are turned somewhat straight, and then make that the same length before you go to install the bar. Another thing to pay attention to is which direction you point the grease zerks. Just make sure you point them in a direction to where you can access them easily. And then also on the front lower bar, there is a camber bolt. We do not need to use that adjustment at all. The main thing is if you're going to be setting this bar the same length as your factory bar, you want to make sure that this bolt is in the same position as it was. So the easy thing to do is to just make a mark at the top of the washer and make a mark on your bracket to make sure that that goes back in the same position. That way, if you don't want to do an alignment right away, you don't have everything out of position. One more thing to pay attention to on the passenger side is this top bolt. You have to access it from the inside of the frame rail. So your downpipe, depending on what downpipe you have, may be in the way of that. So that may be another obstacle you have to work around, whether it's getting creative on how you get to it or whether you actually have to remove the downpipe. But aside from just making sure that you have the proper hardware available ahead of time and just taking your time, making sure you get your lengths set right, this is a fairly straightforward install. Once you're done with the install, make sure that you get your joints greased properly. A couple pumps of grease up in there to keep the bushings lubed up good. And then the other thing that is very important is to make sure that all of your jam nuts are tight. If your jam nuts come loose, you can beat the threads out of these joints, and then not only your end, but your end and your bar will probably be junk and need replaced. So it's very important. I would also recommend that after you put a few hundred miles on it, that you check these, make sure they're still tight. Once you check them once and they're tight, you're usually good to go, but just cannot stress enough how important it is to keep those jam nuts tight.